Okay, now let's talk about the back. The first of the muscle we'll talk about is the latissimus, right? So you can see it right there. And you can see that it starts kind of like, a little higher than mid-back, and it goes all the way down to the tailbone and beyond the tailbone. Actually, now to the tailbone. But it's the lowest 2/3 of your spine, right? And again, emphasize lowest 2/3 of your spine, which means that all these fibers run upward. Why? Because the connection, the attachment of the deltoid of the latissimus is right here, which is higher than all of these lat fibers, certainly higher than the lowest fibers, but even the highest fibers are lower than the insertion, right? So right away, the first clue that tells us is the direction of movement has to be slightly downward from the shoulder joint, not slightly upward from the shoulder joint, right? It has to move toward these origins. So again, if you move in this direction right here, you'll be hitting the greatest number of fibers. But what you'll actually discover is that when your arm is higher, right, these fibers, the lowest fibers, are the ones who have a better angle of pull on that humerus. And then as the arm comes down, you'll notice that it's the upper latissimus fibers that finish that downward movement. So here, it's not so much a matter of direct, because when you're moving the pecs, you're moving forward towards the sternum. Here you're moving laterally inward toward the spine. So all of the latissimus fibers, the highest and the lowest, all participate in what would be considered some type of pull down or pull in, as I like to call it, inward toward the spine. They all participate, and they participate at different stages. The lowest fibers participate earliest. The highest fibers participate last. I do want you to notice this thing right here, right? That's called the mechanical disadvantage that we talked about before. You notice how when the arm is that high, this latissimus muscle is pulling on that bone almost parallel to it. That's a mechanical disadvantage, and it's very, very, very strenuous, very hard, very risky, and not entirely productive, because you want this bone to go out. You don't want this bone to go straight down from that position. You'll see here on this next slide. Now, what I've drawn here is this upper arrow should be the highest that your arm actually goes, right? That's slightly higher than the shoulder joint, right? But not as high as this. Now, imagine that this latissimus muscle is pulling on that bone right there. It's not quite pulling parallel nor perpendicular, but it's about as much mechanical disadvantage as is productive and safe, right? That from that point forward, you can see the direction of pull is toward the greater number of fibers, and it creates this arc right here. Okay, so now let's look at a chin-up. Now this would be considered a relatively narrow grip chin-up. You can see the red dots is where the arm should stop, but instead it's gone way higher than it's got 40 degrees higher than it should. So this is risky. It creates a little bit of a risk of what's called impingement syndrome, which is a squeezing of the infraspinatus tendon between the acromion process of the shoulder, of the scapula, and the upper arm bone. That could cause inflation eventually, or even rupture eventually, although it's less likely to happen on pulling down movements than it is on pushing up movements. But still, you can see that the safer, more productive range of motion would start much lower than this. So that first exercise, the previous exercise, is one of the two exercises people think is best for lats, and this is, of course, the second one people think might be best for lats. Now, the advantage that a lat pull down has is, notice how she can lean back here a little bit. That means that the direction of resistance is coming slightly from her front, from the front of her, right? That's an advantage, because when you bring your arm straight up, you're much more likely to impinge than when your arm is here, okay? So that's one advantage of a lat pull down, right? So if you have a choice between the two, you're better off doing the lat pull down. If you don't have a choice because you don't have a machine, then chin-ups is better than nothing, but it's slightly injurious. You have no way of making the load lighter than body weight unless you have one of those machines that push you up and offset your body weight. But this is the better angle of pull. Now, the problem with this is that on the second photo here, you can see the bar is already touching her chest, yet her elbows are nowhere near actually touching her hip bone or her sides. that would be the end of the range of motion. That would be full contraction of the lats. So she's not able to fully contract her lats with a lat pull down. And the reason for that is very simple. It's because she has her hands attached to a bar. When the arms are up, they're at a decently wide angle. But let me increase my screen here. So let's just say I'm pulling down. Now you can imagine where my hands are. My hands are fairly wide. As I were to pull both of those in, you notice my hands actually come closer together. So unless that lat pull down bar allows your hands to slide inward and then outward, you're never going to be able to bring your elbows down low enough to get a full range of motion. Okay, so let's look at this. This is obviously a one-arm dumbbell row. And the first thing I want you to notice is I've drawn these lines here, right? This B line here, I'm actually showing you the direction of movement, right? The direction of movement is straight through the forearm here, up. And the direction of resistance is straight down from this dumbbell, right? And yet, what direction of pull relative to my torso is that? It's upward, towards the upper part of my torso. Yet we know that the fibers are down here. You should be pulling downward from the shoulder, not upward from the shoulder, right? So this line here is what would be a lat pull down or a lat pull in. The resistance would be coming from a position almost parallel to your torso, but slightly in front of it. And the direction of movement would be going opposite the direction of resistance. So you can see this is a completely wrong direction of resistance and direction of movement if your objective is to work these latissimus fibers. Here's a better angle showing you how wrong a one-arm dumbbell row is for the latissimus. Now, you can see that in the first module of our seminar, we talked about opposite position loading, right? Whatever muscle is positioned directly opposite resistance will be the muscle that's most loaded. Well, here's the direction of resistance. What's most opposite? This one right here, the rear deltoid. Here's the spine, here's the lats. You could argue that in the down position, this is being pulled this way, but look what happens. By the time this arm goes up, it's rotated around, so there's just no way that the muscles that originate on the spine would be doing more pulling of an upward direction than the muscles that are connected to the back of your shoulder, which is the posterior deltoids. One-arm dumbbell row is tremendously more posterior deltoid, slightly teres major, which is a small muscle, than it is either latissimus or any other back muscle, any other muscle that originates on your spine. Okay, so again, the latissimus muscle pulls the humerus downward and inward toward the spine. Rowing movements pull your arms backward and slightly away from the spine. Now, one thing that I want to bring your attention to, some of these rowing machines either give you a narrow handle like this, right? Or they have two separate arms. The point is you start narrow and you end wide. Well, guess what? You're moving away from the spine. The second you pull your arm behind your back on any kind of lat exercise, you've already moved away from the spine. Now you're moving in the direction of the rear deltoid, right? The latissimus muscle does not pull the arm